Our next session is going to be looking more closely at regulatory affairs. So I'm going to invite two gentlemen on stage with me. Please take your seats. So these two guys are Serafino Nicoletti. He's Yes, Serafino Abate. He's the head of regulatory affairs at Volvo, and Stefano Nicoletti, who's the principal of, I should say Stefano. Someone told me earlier it's Stefano. Stefano Nicoletti, who's principal of regulatory affairs at BT. So thank you, Andrew. I forgot already. The title of this session is Times Are Changing, What's Next for Digital Regulatory Affairs? Now, what's great about this is that we've got guys who are both experts on regulation, but looking at it from slightly different perspectives. So I'm going to start with Serafino. You're at Volvo, and obviously data is no longer just generated by people, it's generated by things. And so maybe you could give us a little talk on how data regulation impacts Volvo and what the current regulation is like and where you might see it going in the future.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks for the introduction, and thank you to Dario, where is he gone now, and the team at MEF for the invitation. Yes. It's really nice to be here. It's my first conference post-COVID, and it's nice to sit and listen to business people talking about ideas and innovation. So I'm really pleased to be here. I started with Volvo Cars a month ago. I work in regulatory affairs in the R&D department, focusing on the connected car cloud. And this is a job that, when I was looking at the title of this panel, it made me reflect on, I spent about 15 years working on public affairs and regulation for telecom markets. And now I'm in a new job where the challenges somehow reflect how regulation is changing. You mentioned the data, and I think is a good example of the things that, if we compare the old world of regulation we had in terms of goals, clear, well-defined goals, and a narrow focus on specific aspects, for example, infrastructure, but there was a lot of emphasis on promoting competition for the benefit of the consumer. Today, a lot of new regulation, which regards issues, data access, software updates, cloud, others that are coming, and they affect products such as the Volvo connected cars. What I find is that you start usually from a less well-defined problem. The problem statement up front is not as clear as the old regulation, and partially because a lot of these new rules are looking at things that might happen in the future that might signal the market is not working. So we are trying to fix things that not necessarily have gone wrong yet. But that makes the regulation itself, the scope of it, more difficult, more broader, and that opens clearly to a lot more leeway for interpretation. My new job is basically to tell people in R&D the next 5 years of model, for each model, given the feature that they want to put, what are the regulatory requirements. Now, if I was dealing with telecom, I could come up with a list of licenses, and pretty much that would already cover most of what I needed. Now, when we are talking about the connected car cloud, I need to understand personal data. I'll park it because I'm not a privacy lawyer and it's a word in itself, but only to start thinking non-personal data, it's a huge challenge. How do you access, do you continue to provide a safe and secure product while having an open access regime in effect? You can see that we have unclear, therefore, when the rules are laid out, what's the implication are for the concrete use cases. All these new rules are coming into force, they are horizontal, they apply to everything, but when I look at it, for example, the Data Act in Europe mentioned vehicles, others don't necessarily, but if you are in a kind of like specific vertical working on a product, you struggle to see what that means for you in terms of regulatory requirements. And third, what I see also is that in the past, we had rules, we had regulators that were assigned to implement them. Today, again, is becoming fuzzier. In the case of data, non-personal data, AI, there isn't a natural regulator. A lot of the legislation that I've seen in the making does not nail the point of governance up front, which I think is a big mistake, because who do we complain to? Who tells us what is compliance and what is not compliance? So we are getting now in a situation where there is a lot more interpretation to be done. In some cases, all these rules are thought, because they are thought horizontally, nobody has kind of like taken, all right, if I am providing this type, connected car products, how do I build a regulatory compliance framework that ensures that the product is digitally enabled and is compliant from the regional, local, or global perspective? So I think I've seen a lot of more of these difficulties coming into play, and that means we need really to become more interpreted of regulation. It reminds me of the word of the oracle in the old ancient times when, you kind of like, what does it mean? And you kind of provide an explanation to the software engineers, and they kind of like go, all right. But, and then you start a dialogue. But this is a very different game than it was in the past from a regulatory affairs perspective. And this has a direct and immediate impact on innovation. If we cannot work out how compliance looks like, you're going to have, in some cases, products that are digitally enabled, but the feature are switched off because locally you don't know what are the requirements. You don't want to go into non-compliance. Non-compliance is not an issue for a car maker because the not requires recalling cars. And there is a disaster commercially, but also, you don't want to do that. So you work to be compliant. But, this is the challenge that we're facing now.
So very briefly, what are the regulatory rules around connected cars at the moment? Because obviously, regulation is in place to protect consumers. And so that's why cars don't blow up, or if they shouldn't. But if you're shipping a car now that is sending data out, what are the current regulations in Europe, for example, that you would have to abide by?
The grayer area at the moment, so GDPR we all know, talked about, we digested it, but what GDPR doesn't do is telling me it doesn't contextualize the definition of personal data when it comes to specific application. So where do I draw the line within the car? There is a lot of different layers of data that are generated for different purposes. Some is not even accessible to the car maker, it just goes inside the system. Some of this data is code, which is covered by IP, intellectual property. So suddenly you are in a very complex nexus where you might have some personal data, some non-personal data, some bits of code that are part of IP. How does an open access work in that situation when you have a product which is performing, when it's on, is performing a mission critical product? Safety and security, it's the first thing. So how do you square all these different,
Okay, so Stefano, turning to you. So you're with BT. If you press it, it should go green. Has it gone green?
Flashing green, yeah.
Good. So what's your view? What kind of digital regulation do you have to abide by at the moment, and where do you see it going in the future?
First of all, a quick introduction. I work in the group regulatory affair in BT. BT is the largest telecommunication providers here in the UK, for those of you who come from abroad. We connect beyond and above 30 million people in the UK every day, every time. We operate both as a fixed and a mobile network under the brand of EE, the latter. In fact, we are just about to undergo a rebranding where everything everywhere, the brand EE, will also be used for fixed connectivity. This is testament of the role and the importance of mobile. This has just been announced. We are a company that is investing heavily in network. We have a mission to roll out 25 million homes connecting through fiber by 2025. We have probably the best 5G network already, and we are aiming at covering the entire UK by 2028. As of today, we have the widest penetration and coverage, around 50%. So to your point about digital, we are clearly undergoing a transformation to become a digital company, and that's a challenge, how we stay relevant in 10 years down the line. With this very much, let's say, soul, which is very much around connectivity. The digital rules that we are following most in terms of the developments are developing in the UK and as much as the rest of Europe. What we have observed then is of today the news that during the Queen's speech, the legislation for the digital market units has been ditched and postponed to next year. The digital market units is effectively a competition market authority regulator that operates now under the powers of CMA, but would have had legal power to investigate in the behavior of digital and large tech firms, and it's not going to happen this year. It's a bit of a disappointment from a consumer perspective, we believe, but also for companies like us. We really hope that the development of this will be going in the direction when Ofcom, at least, which is very much closer to our business, will work closely with the Competition and Market Authority. And in terms of the interactions of digitals and network, particularly, this idea that traditional problems will go away and there will be a refocusing more on consumer regulation is something that I would like to challenge. To me, for example, the cloud market is very much a consolidated market, a market where there are only 3-4 large players globally. And public cloud are going to be very important for a sector like ours, particularly in the coming years when you will see more of what's called software-defined network or network virtualization. Effectively, for the non-expert, the core aspects of the network will move on to servers that will be, normal servers, but effectively core activities of the network will be run on software. And this will be a substantial saving for us. But how do you guarantee that once you are in the hotel, as a colleague of mine defines this as a sort of Hotel California problem. So, you can stay as much as you want, but you cannot ever leave because there is a sort of lock-up effect. And probably there will be market dynamics that will prevent us to operate effectively and to capitalize on those savings. But another example is that the large tech firms also operate as MVNOs. They operate in the field of electronic SIM, eSIM, and also in other areas that are very close to mobile. How do we guarantee that when they operate in these fields, they don't leverage their strategic market status, their power in the market to the advantage of closer market, for example, in the mobile services? How do we defend from this? So these are our new real competitors as much as being partner from us. And finally, and probably most importantly and most imminently, the aspect of traffic management. Now, speaking of 5G network particularly, or in general mobile network, traffic has grown and is growing at an unprecedented rate. Ofcom estimates that by 2030, traffic in the UK will grow by between 21 and 52 times. cost and price per gigabyte at the end user has dropped drastically. In 2015, 1 gigabyte was around £17. Nowadays, roughly £2. And this means it's dropped like as much as 80%. So the reality is that this business model is no longer going to be viable. And we are going to have the ability, we need the ability to manage traffic on the network so that those who create congestion effectively either pay for it or contribute to this step investment that we need to make for things to work. Particularly under COVID, we have seen moments where either football matches were broadcasted through Amazon Prime networks, or when game downloads such as Fortnite went on, the network was completely overloaded, reaching the records of several hundred terabytes at some point. And clearly, this isn't going to longer be sustainable. So what we are working on, and what we think it's important that the regulator should be working on, is to review the concept of net neutrality, which probably now is the wrong term. It's about the ability of manage the traffic on a network that is no longer fit for purpose for what was designed at the beginning. So the ability for us to introduce differentiated pricing for when you decide to run that download on Fortnite, and I'm talking about the companies. And when you've got 5-6 companies that generate 80% of that traffic, then how do you introduce in the system a mechanism whereby they can contribute to the network as well? Because clearly it's going to be important for the benefit of end user. And it's proved, there are studies already out there that justify that such an investment would not only be beneficial for the industry and for the wider sector, but for wider society. There will be increasing economic benefits. It's only of a week ago, the ETNO, which is the association that represents most mobile operators, quantifies a benefit in the areas of 52 billions for the entire economy in Europe, with fronting an investment of 20 billion. So that's the sort of challenge that we see and we face in this space.
Well, that's talking about content companies contributing to network costs is a very old issue. If I can take you back to the, you talked about network virtualization, and for those who don't know, the ability to slice up your network and then
Yeah, that's the slicing more. Network virtualization is about effectively moving the network functions from from vendors' kit, usually very expensive and need to be located in various points of the network, onto more generic servers. Most of the functions are run by software, and therefore you can reduce costs for the amount of kits you have to maintain, and for in general because software is easier to upgrade, etc.
And so specifically, what new issues do regulators have to deal with as a result of that change towards network virtualization? Yes.
From my perspective, as I said, the fundamental problem is that network virtualization happens in a context of a cloud. So we are lucky enough to have our own cloud here in the UK, but most importantly, for other operators in general, there will be the need to effectively have part of their functions, core to their business, run on cloud networks owned by one of these 4 or 5 cloud providers that dominate the market. Once you're in, and you have got to do a huge amount of spending in terms of customization of these networks. So once you're in, and maybe you do that for very good reasons, analysts this year at the Mobile World Congress were talking about up to 30% of OPEX savings in implementing this sort of strategy. Once you're in, you have got key functions of your network run on top of someone else's platforms. How do you and you've spent a huge amount in customizing those services. What happens if all of a sudden prices go up? How can you control that? You are locked in. So again, I guess the point for me would be having to look from a regulatory perspective at the let's say, dimensions of that market and the needs for this market to be ensuring a competitive outcome.
Right. So as Volvo looked into the, private network slicing area and private networking area, I know some car companies have done that.
So Volvo has got sort of like dedicated cloud, the Volvo Car Cloud, which is hosted by a third-party provider. And then we partner in different regions with different telecom operators for the provision of connectivity. So since 2013, when the first sort of like Volvo connected cars came out, the Torsland, the main production site in Gothenburg, it's about 6 million connected enabled car around the world that Volvo has produced. All of them require, you have an ongoing connectivity contract, and now you are building on, how that works with your cloud, but you also have all these different connection technologies. There is this V2X, which is the ability to vehicle to connect with, street furniture, other cars. This is the next frontier to be able to have a sort of like really impact on traffic manageability. And these solutions are now being discussed. What's best, is a mix of Wi-Fi simulation, network in the other, analyzing the criticality of the different sort of like situation, to understand what infrastructure would provide the best solution. But it's fundamental to the business now. I mean, no connected car, there's no car in 10 years' time.
And Volvo, you're shipping cars all over the world, and there's different regulatory environments all over the world. Some probably don't have any regulation, and others have very tight regulations. So how do you manage that complexity?
This is the trick, because I think while, when you sell a product is available in more than 100 countries, but obviously you don't produce in 100 countries. You have I think less than 10 big production sites around the world. This is for, the assembly of the final product, and then you have, people that brings in bits and pieces. What you do, this is the challenge is vary by region. So Europe, with all these, pros and cons, what we kind of like seem to have managed, at least the understanding that, as a common market, we need common rules. The UK aligns, if not providing you usually, greater protection. So there is a big boost because you have, the biggest economic market where you can follow one set of rules. For other geographies, the US tend to have more specific rules, but to be honest, more on the sort of like traditional car bits, the tires, the bits, than the digital stuff. And then you have, if I look at other regions, where we are present, there's obviously China, where it's produced locally to local standards. And then you have production in, I think it's South Korea, another site that produces for the Asia Pacific. And you tend to sort of like you usually adopt as a first point, as a base minimum, you look what is available in the region, what standard or regulation. You see whether there is a common denominator that you can adopt. Sometimes, in some regions, if you come from complying, regulation in one country is recognized through mutual agreements with other country. And then there are global fora. One is called OICA, which is Global Association of Car Maker. As an ongoing dialogue, there is a UN body, UNECE, which has responsibility for making rules worldwide for automotive. Right. So there is some sort of like global level that you can rely on, but I'm telling you, I have a list of 350 regulatory requirements globally that I need to manage.
350?
Yeah, it's me and another guy. And we just arrived, the job wasn't done systematically, I'm the first, and we are the first two people that come in to do regulatory affairs, digital.
Wow. So. Any questions from the audience? Or from online, Dario?
Caught me by off guard. So great to hear about the different problems the companies have got. Here we got some companies like Volvo that has to use the right regulatory framework. BT has got too much data. which is the other side of a coin. But just to make it more complicated, here's another question from Mabel Mabel Cueto from Spain, which is, well, compliance always around human rights, respect, and fiscal security. What about HR? Must be around HR. So there's questions about, throwing to you, about data, about how human rights, respect, physical security, apologies, I read, and HR. Are you impacted by any of these?
So I think there are very strict rules in the automobile sector about safety and security, and I think Volvo's DNA is in safety. I mean, Volvo started because the other cars could not live on the Nordic roads safely, so they produced something that could take all the bumpy roads and the minus 20 degrees and whatsoever. So I think it's very, very taken very seriously by the whole industry. So nobody is even thinking of compromising that goal with whatever comes now. I mean, that is paramount. And I think, in compliance with that, you always do in a way that you reflect, the best practice. I mean, if you want to be a sort of trusted partner, as you move more and more, the car, once you bought the car, and then it's yours, and you fix it, or you take it to fix it, it's your problem, whatever. Now is a relationship-based service. And then you need trust, and that's why I think putting, the ethics, the right ethics in terms of the personal data and the person and the safety and security is really the first building block.
That makes sense. We were talking about personal data versus car data as well. So here we go. The answer is you still have to comply with the overall physical person. In the end, has got a relationship. That's what you used. I'm jumping into your role, but I'm seeing that they're pointing at me, but I should point at you. There are some questions over there.
Yeah, so I've got a question for you. So John Ellis wrote a book in 2017 called The $0 Car, and he proposed that on average the connected car would produce about $40,000 worth of data, to which I bought the car, I drove the car, I maintained the car, I produced that data, but yet I'm not getting a check from the car companies for 40 grand. So how do we manage that value exchange? And one argument I've heard is, well, in the case of like Tesla, I give you the data and I'm getting constant updates to the car. It's innovating, that works out well. But then there's models like what Rover's doing, where they're actually selling the camera data to the local cities to then help the cities prioritize the fixing of potholes. So there actually is an economic model there, and to what end will individuals be able to participate in that exchange?
I'll start from them.
Having worked in the sector, tangentially before, what I can say is that probably out of those $40,000, most of them would be probably untapped somewhere in a business or in a number of businesses which for some reason I haven't taken off. And you mentioned the potholes, but I could think about vehicle to X, vehicle to infrastructure, think about marketing and more efficient management of the traffic, congestions, running more efficiently, for example, including the vehicle as a service. So where you share your car with some others, and you actually reduce congestion and reduce the need for urban infrastructure, which is designed around the cars. Let's not forget that our cars stay idle for 80-90% of their time. We use only them comparatively a small time during the day. Probably with obviously some clear exceptions. So it feels to me that the same parallel could be drawn in onto what's happening with my data that I'm sharing with the likes of Google or other hyperscalers online, where I never see the check, but I do get them through maybe using free services. So that's the parallel I can think of. But again, probably in the context of connected cars, we are at a very early stage. While I can see the value of that data, probably I cannot see a clear business model yet because of the lack of infrastructure and the missing parts around that model, which is yet to emerge. And it's actually very complex to develop because it may not just depend by the likes of the automakers, but other parts, the municipalities, and therefore, it's probably going to be idle for a while.
If I can add, I think from the Volvo car perspective, you want to manage the relationship very carefully, first of all, because the philosophy should be to empower the user with its data. That is the starting point. How then the user chooses? I mean, you have different layers then. In a connected car, you have, if you want, the layer where you have a third-party partner that you partner with, that may use that data, and they have their own relationship with the user. And then you may have, third party that may not have a relationship with the user of the car, but they may want to have access to that data. Now, this third party is what the Data Act is about, the third party access. It has to be said that, in my short time at Volvo, and I stress again, not a long time, because there everybody has worked 20 years there. I've been in a month, the culture is very much, I've not heard anybody, there is no plan, there are no to monetize the data of the user. No, in a million years. The key is a safe product. Then the data is an instrument to achieve a safer product. And then you monetize that. Also, I think, it's becoming kind of like, I think, the monetization, I don't know. So this is for me the starting point within Volvo cars. So, how does the user fit in all this? What is, because there's a danger there, I think we lose perspective that, the one that has to benefit as the user is we are real about, delivering to the spirit of all the rules that protect the user data. We need to give the user the first word and the power when it comes to his data. And just to add that, car makers already share for free a lot of data with public authorities. There is, for example, an initiative, Data for Safer Roads, which comes out of the European directive. Now I remember the number, but I think they've been sharing data about 8 kind of like type of incidents on the car that the users can access for free anytime, is this data, and that is given for free as a voluntary basis to public authorities precisely. So there is already sharing that has been there from the beginning, but has been driven by, if you want, public goods, where there was specific initiative, sharing with accredited and trusted third parties, partners. So it's done in steps, but it's there already.
We haven't even got onto what happens when we go autonomous and who owns the data then. But we haven't got time, I'm afraid. So Serafino and Stefano, thank you so much for your insights. Shall I hand over to Dario to just wrap up the session?
We had more questions, so first of all, thanks very much.